In this video, we're going to take a look at Elliptic's methodology for calculating what we call exposure. So when we're looking at the results of an address or transaction screening, or looking at the exposure tab in the investigator tool, we'll see what's labeled as source of funds here and destination of funds here. So for example, this is a Bitcoin wallet that I've screened with the address that we see up here. We'll see wallet inflow and outflow, and then exposure broken down by source of funds and destination of funds by category. So we'll see, for example, the dark service category contributed 64%, or roughly $1,600 of the total $2,500 inflow associated with this address. And we can further break down that dark service category by the specific entities that we've traced to. So we're looking at PinPays, which is indirectly connected 12 hops away. They contributed 64%, or roughly $1,600. So when we're looking at what's called source of funds exposure, we're looking at all the transactions that are feeding into that transaction hash or wallet address that we've screened. We're following all of those transactions until we get to a labeled entity, or it dilutes down into 0.01% or less exposure. And same for destination of funds. We're starting at a transaction hash or a wallet address, following all of the funds that leave that transaction hash or wallet address until we get to that labeled entity, or the funds dilute down to less than 0.01%. We can see what that looks like here. So what we're looking at is X, our screened address. We see 1 Bitcoin transferring into X. We have from A, 2 Bitcoins going into that sort of intermediary address. From B and C, we have a total of 1 Bitcoin going into this intermediary address, which then feeds all of that 1 Bitcoin into the funding address here. And then from D, we're having essentially 1 Bitcoin taking one intermediary hop before landing here. So we can break this down as 2 out of the 4 total Bitcoin funding this address here being sourced from labeled entity A. Likewise for B and C, B represents 6.25%, or 0.25 Bitcoin of that total 4 Bitcoin flow, and C represents 0.75 Bitcoin, or 18.75% of that 4 Bitcoin flow going here. 1 out of the 4 Bitcoin, or 25% of the source of funds, can be traced to D. Flipping the exposure around now, we'll see the exact same story in reverse. We have our screened wallet labeled X here, 1 Bitcoin leaving it to this address here. And then from here, we can look at various flows of funds, again, to A, 2 Bitcoin going out there. Then we have 1 Bitcoin going out to this address, which gets split into 0.25 Bitcoin going to B, 0.75 Bitcoin going to C. And then here, our 1 hop with 1 Bitcoin passing through this intermediary address into D. So this would likewise be represented as 50% exposure to A and 25% exposure to D, essentially the same exposure history as we saw on the source of fund side of this wallet. So when we're looking at the exposure history of an address, we're tracing all of these transactions feeding into it. What exactly is the stopping condition aside from a labeled entity like Tornado Cash, Hydra Marketplace, etc.? Those labeled entities would show up in the exposure history, but what if we can't trace to a labeled entity at all? So if we can identify the origin of the crypto asset, and that address happens to be unlabeled, we would attribute that as the unknown category. Otherwise, if we continue tracing that exposure through multiple hops and the contribution percentage falls below 0.01%, that qualifies as the second stopping condition,